While most PlayStation models have been successful, only one can be called an abject failure. Ironically, this is probably the best PlayStation ever built. I'm of course talking about the launch model PlayStation 3. Originally unveiled at E3 2005, with a controller that some would call a freak of nature,
Oh, hell no, man.
the PS3 represented a remarkable advancement from its predecessor. With HD graphics, Blu-ray playback, wireless connectivity, and an array of other features. However, the console would make prospective buyers wait an additional year and a half before hitting store shelves. Also, for some reason, there was a baby involved? I don't know, the early 2000s were weird, man. The PS3 launched to a moderate success. However, a distinct lack of launch titles and the extremely steep price of almost 1,000 kangaroo dollars, that's 499 freedom dollars for the Americans out there, meant that the console was quickly overtaken by its cooler and hipper cousin, the Xbox 360. Although the PS3 had a high price, Sony was still selling it at a loss, meaning that they were actively losing money on every console sold. In order to cut costs, Sony would subsequently cut features out of the lineup. First on the chopping block was PS2 backwards compatibility. When Sony refreshed the console with the PS3 Slim, they managed to shrink the die size from 90nm all the way to 45nm. This, along with the removal of the SD and CF card readers, allowed Sony to lower the price of the console to an impressive $200 US. This price cut, along with an influx of high-quality exclusive games, helped to cement the console as a strong player of the 7th generation. By the end of the generation, the PS3 and Xbox 360 were actually neck and neck, with the PS3 only selling a couple of million units more. Now that the history lesson is out of the way, let's focus back on the launch model PS3 that we were talking about. Over the years, this model has become incredibly valuable to collectors, as it is the only way to play PS2 games natively at Full HD. Unfortunately, poor sales figures aren't the only thing that affected these PS3s. They also suffer from crippling hardware failure, effectively turning 99% of them into e-waste. Now, there's a lot of contention in the community on what the correct way to fix these is. Some even going out of their way to make multi-hour video essays on the topic. The method I used in this video is what worked for me, and I have been using my console throughout the past 6 months without issue. Although I can't guarantee this fix will work for you, so I recommend doing your own research before choosing which repair to do. I received this PS3 from a friend who had imported it from Japan for me. Importing these from overseas and repairing them turns out to be much more cost effective than buying one locally. In the case of my console, it's getting the dreaded yellow light of death when attempting to power it on. The fix I've decided to attempt for this is to replace a batch of capacitors that are known to go bad on the console. In this video, I'll be showing you how to replace these capacitors and get your PS3 up and running again. Hopefully, if all goes well, we'll even be able to play some PS2 games when this is all done. Before we start the repair, I'd like to give a special thanks to this video's sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay is a one-stop shop for all your manufacturing needs, whether that be 3D printing, CNCing, or PCB manufacturing and assembly. 3D printers and other equipment can be expensive and bulky. PCBWay helps alleviate the strain on your wallet by offering a cheap and effective way to quickly prototype your designs without the need for any equipment. Maybe you're building your own Bluetooth iPod, or just need to prototype a design. PCBWay is the place for you. For a limited time only, PCBWay are offering a range of discounts throughout the holiday season, so make sure to check the link below and get manufacturing with PCBWay today. Now, to actually fix this PS3, we will have to completely disassemble it. The first step is to remove the hard drive. This is hidden behind a little access hatch on the base of the console. The hard drive is installed with a single screw, and with it removed, the drive slides right out. With the hard drive out of the way, the next step is to remove a security screw, which keeps the faceplate in place. In classic Sony fashion, it's hidden behind a warranty void sticker. Seriously? F you, Sony. With the sticker peeled off, there's a little rubber grommet which needs to be pulled out. Be careful with this, as it deteriorates with age, so it can break relatively easily. Once the screw is removed, you can slide the translucent plastic faceplate, like so. This now reveals a myriad of screws. Make sure to keep note of their locations, as they are all different lengths. With the screws out, the PS3 can now be opened like a clam. I do commend Sony, as the internal components of their consoles are always incredibly well laid out. First up, I removed the CF card reader. This self-contained module can be removed with a couple of screws and unplugging the ribbon cable from underneath. Next up, I focus on getting the power supply removed. Once again, it's a neat self-contained unit that comes out with a couple more screws and the unplugging of a couple connectors. Now for the Blu-ray drive. Be careful when removing this, as I find its connecting ribbon cable often degrades with age and can be easily damaged. Thankfully, replacements can be found online relatively inexpensively, which I've linked below for your convenience. This is a Sony console after all, so there's still an ungodly amount of screws that we have to remove before we can get any deeper. The power button PCB is easy. 2 screws and another flex cable and the board pops right out. A couple more screws and we can get the antenna assembly out as well. After removing a couple of straggling screws, the logic board comes out without too much of a fight. Flipping the board around reveals the cooling assembly. I pulled the fan out so I could give it a much needed clean. The plastic I/O cover should unclip from the board with a little bit of prying as well. The cooler retention brackets then need to be removed. These apply pressure to the processor and GPU to ensure efficient thermal transfer. With the straggling flex cables removed, the top EMI shield pops right off without a problem. Now flip the board over and disconnect the clock battery. Also, don't miss these 2 sneaky screws on the hard drive bay. With these out, the bottom EMI shield should pop right off as well. Let's just take a moment to appreciate the PS3's main board. This thing is huge! It contains not just the cell processor and reality synthesizer of the PS3, but also the entire emotion engine of the PS2. Sony really spared no expense in order to get this thing to run PS2 games, and there really is no better way other than running it on original hardware. Before I start with the repairs, I make sure to tape off the sensitive areas around where I'll be working. This way, if I accidentally slip, I hopefully don't damage anything. I also tried insulating the rest of the main board with aluminium foil, as I planned on using a heat gun to remove the defective components. However, I quickly discovered a heat gun wasn't at all effective, so don't bother doing this yourself. While I'm at it, I also removed the crusty thermal paste from the processors. We'll be replacing this later anyway. These banks of capacitors are what we'll be replacing today. There are 8 of them in total, 4 on either side of the board. These are what help filter power for the CPU and GPU, and are known failure points on this model. First, we fruitlessly tried to remove the chips with a hot air gun. Or is the chip just bending?
No, wait. It's not just a plastic case? Oh yeah, it is just a plastic case. Okay.
It's not coming off. After some head scratching, we decided the dumbest solution is often the smartest one. Said solution was prying at the chips with our tweezers until they broke apart. Our methods may have been barbaric, but after the first couple of chips we got the hang of things, and getting the rest off was quite easy. Once all the capacitors had been removed, the next step was to clean the pads and add some fresh solder. Before we can install these new capacitors, the PCB beneath the chips has to be scraped away to reveal the ground plane underneath. My tool of choice was this PCB scrape, generally used for restoring compact Macs. This process took quite some time, so I'll fast forward through the rest for you. We can finally install the replacement capacitors. The ones we need are 470 UF 6.3 volt tantalums. We'll need 16 of them in total. To make life easier, I first tin the pads on each cap. They can then be soldered to the PCB. Make sure you install them in the correct orientation, with the positive side connected to the outer rail and the negative side soldered to that ground plane we exposed earlier. Now simply repeat that process for all the capacitors. With the capacitors now in place, all we have to do is run a jumper wire on each cluster and bridge the outermost rails. Once you're done, the logic board should look something like this. To be on the safe side, I used some Kapton tape to insulate my handiwork. The old thermal pads were quite brittle, so I decided to replace them with some fresh ones that I had lying around. Next, I add a healthy amount of fresh thermal paste to the CPU and GPU. These guys get hot, so I recommend using high quality paste. Alright, our repair is complete and we can now reassemble the console. I'm going to fast forward through this. However, the process of reassembling it is much the same as the original disassembly. Now that the PS3 is all assembled, it's ready to test. And I think you know what this means. Yep, it's time for another tech montage. Thanks for making it through the video. And if you're an existing subscriber, thanks for waiting so long for this video to come out. It's been, oh my god, it's been over a year since I last uploaded? Well, thanks for waiting that long. I can't promise I'll be uploading more often in the future. Let's just say I've got a fair amount of stuff on at the moment. However, I will update you soon with a follow-up video that'll explain what I have been doing for the past 2 years. And trust me, I think it'll be worth the wait. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd recommend doing so you can be notified when that video comes out. Also, I'd like to thank PCBWay again for sponsoring this video. I'll see you guys next time.